we're going to get into this because there's a lot of stuff to break down. Start with running back. This is probably the one with the most famously named strategies these days, and that would be zero RB and hero RB. Much different than the olden days, whether you're going to want to call it heavy running back or double running back up front. We used to draft running backs hot and heavy at the start of drafts, and now the most talked about, most popular strategies are these ones that either take none in the first several rounds or take one really strong one, ideally in the first round, and then wait for a while. That would be hero RB. So, Heath, I'll throw it to you first. Let's just hit on zero RB because that's the one that people love to talk about, love to hear about. Is it viable? Do you like to use zero RB? And if so, how do you pull it off?
Yeah, I liked it a lot more a couple of years ago than I do right now. I think it's gotten really difficult because I don't really like a lot of the running backs in the round 4 through 6 range. And in the drafts, a lot of the drafts that I'm doing with analysts where there's so many wide receivers going in the first 2 rounds, I have a hard time, especially if I have a pick in the middle of round 1 and I end up with like Bijan or Brees available, and then I get to round 3 and there's a top 8 running back available. Like I find myself more with 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds than I do going zero RB now. Now, I think you can find some instances, especially towards the back of the draft after Brees and Bijan are gone, where I might end up in that situation where I'm starting with a couple wide receivers and then I get to the end of round 3 and there's a tight end I really like, and then maybe there's a quarterback I like at the start of round 4, and so at the back of round 1 it's more likely, but even there it seems like with the way running backs are getting pushed down, kind of what John was talking about earlier, I find most often that like the point scorers I really like in that round 3 range, especially since they're set for me and my projections, a really big tier of wide receivers once you get past the top 12 or 13. It's 18 guys within basically a half of a fantasy point per game in projections. And some of those guys are being drafted in round 2, 3, and some of them are being drafted in round 5, 6. I have a hard time taking the round 2, 3 guys.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, according to current aggregate ADP, the 3-4 turn, so end of the third round, you're getting Josh Jacobs, who's the RB12, and I happen to like quite a bit, or you're getting Devontae Smith, who's a wide receiver 20. So you're still getting an RB1 if you wait all the way until the end of the third round, typically, whereas you're already into the mid-range wide receiver 2s. John, does this ever work out for you? Do you find yourself going zero RB at all?
If I do, it's on accident. It would be, I mean, I typically, I would agree with Heath. Like, there's 11 running backs that I think work as a hero RB. Just an aside on the hero RB. I'm really glad that we got rid of and we're stopped using modified zero RB.
Mm-hmm.
That, like, I don't get into many Twitter arguments or Twitter wars, but I was not going to let zero RB folks co-opt hero RB or, you know, drafting a running. I mean, it's just completely antithesis to the whole zero RB.
It makes no sense.
It makes
no
no
modified
sense.
Zero. It's the whole point of zero.
I haven't seen it much, but I still have my memes ready if I need to pull them out. Anyway, if I like, there's 11 running backs to me all the way through Pacheco. So to me, and those are guys I'm excited about at running back. And that would not, you know, the cutoff for me is like Pacheco to James Cook to Rachaad White, which is kind of gross, and Josh Jacobs. Yeah. I'm not sure what's going to, you know, so I really feel good about, you know, Gibbs, except for this HN Gibbs, except for this hamstring, ETN, Pacheco. So those are like the last few guys that I would utilize in hero RB situation. And since everybody's like underdog pilled with all these receivers early, I'm kind of in the same boat as Heath. I'm sitting there in the first or second round, and these running backs I'm not expecting to be there are there. I might as well take 2, or at the very least take 1. So I don't really end up in the zero RB streets too often.
Yeah, I wonder if that's one of the things that will start to change in what Heath highlighted with the best ball mania now finally starting to get overtaken by the normal redrafters, whether these running backs will start to bounce back up. But I agree with the Pacheco drop off, and I think one of the most interesting spots for me to end up going quote unquote zero RB is if I have the second or third pick and I get Tyreek or CeeDee Lamb. Although I will say I'm starting to consider Tyreek at the 101. over CMC, but that's a different story. And then you come back to the back of the second, and Pacheco's already gone, and the back end of that RB tier that you really like is already gone. And so you're looking at one of these stronger wide receivers, or maybe hitting even one of the first tight ends, or Josh Allen. And if you do that, now maybe you're waiting past that group of guys that Heath likes in the third, and you end up with the 0 RB situation. So I agree. I don't see it happening often for myself. I think hero RB, where you're taking one of these first, 12 or so, or ideally 6, but maybe 12, is much more common because of how much the running backs are being pushed down. And back in the old days, if you miss a running back in the first round, well, now you might have to go 0 RB. But when we've got 12 through 2 and another, dozen still going a couple rounds later, and you're into the fourth and you can still get a starting running back, it's kind of hard to go 0 RB. It's just realistically. But hero RB is pretty nice. What about indexing heavily into running back? Because of all the talk of the front-loaded wide receivers and how often we're taking wide receivers in the first couple rounds, it opens up the opportunity to get to, start 2 or 3 running backs in the beginning. But because those wide receivers are so popular, if you wait too long, now you're missing out on the elite ones. Heath, how often do you find yourself taking 2 running backs in the first 2 picks, or even 2 in the first 3, starting that heavy?
2 in the first 3 has happened more often than I'm really comfortable with, but just because of where the value's at. That's just not, like I said, I was pretty into the hero RB, the 0 RB for several years, and so I'm trying to get comfortable with this year. That's where I think the value is. I think like the real distinction, and I think that will make it easier. And you mentioned, like, we've talked about the best ball mania fading. I think what we'll see is the wide receivers stay really heavy in the first 3 rounds, but then there's going to be some guys that we have top 20 or top 24, at least I do, that fall into that round 5, 6 range, which make this a little bit easier. If everybody, that's the thing that people I think sometimes forget, is nobody else is probably drafting exactly based on your rankings. And so if there is this really big tier from 14 to 31, now it does happen sometimes if you happen to be someone whose rankings are in the draft room, which isn't a whole lot of fun. But like if you view those 14 through 30 all as kind of the same guys, there's a really good chance that a couple of guys you have ranked in the 24 to 16 to 24 range are going to be available later than they should be.
Yeah, on that note, John, I'll throw it to you kind of to kick into this. If you do end up waiting on running back, whether it's hero RB and then you wait 5 or 6 rounds, or whether it's 0 and you're waiting 4 or 5, are there guys in that range that you're looking to target that are like the last arch RB1 that you want, or the last true RB2 if you went hero RB?
Yeah, I was going, and that was an excellent question, Matt, because I was going to actually comment on this. I feel like this is an interesting year, maybe a weird year, in that the number of touches available, even if they're gross, are in the 6th to 9th range at running back. I don't remember it ever being like this. Like Najee Harris, probably 320 plus touches if he stays healthy, is available in the 7th round. Devin Singletary is, as gross as the Giants offense is likely to be, he's very much, likely to be the bell cow. He's available in the 9th round. And just of a lot of these guys that people kind of are wishy-washy on, David Montgomery, Raheem Mostert, James Conner, Ramondre Stevenson, Aaron Jones, DeAndre Swift, Zamir White, Javonte Williams, Jalen Warren. These guys are all going in at 6th to 9th. So, like, 0 RB is very viable if you are okay with those guys. I mean, usually the 0 RB folks just want, injury upside, but you can actually draft 5 receivers and then have James Conner as your RB1 if it falls correctly, or Zamir White or an Aaron Jones, or a Raheem Mostert. And that can be a very effective, and it can be a very effective thing. It's just kind of gross. Like, people don't like these players for a number of reasons, either injury or just not being flashy, or not having the Bijan, Breece Hall type upside of the 2-3, running backs. And so I think in a hero RB standpoint, these guys make great RB2s, and you can actually grab two of these guys in that range, and now you have, players to rotate there in that RB2 spot, or you can, just bypass the position altogether and still get, a couple guys with like 280, 320 touch upside way late in the draft.
Yeah, for me, that exact not only range but list of names that you hit on, especially at the end there, is kind of my sweet spot. Zamir White, Ramondre Stevenson, David Montgomery is probably going to move up out of that range with the Jahmyr Gibbs news. Aaron Jones, and then James Conner is my absolute favorite. I'm leaving every possible draft I can with James Conner. All those guys going in basically the 6th round range. If I can get 2 of those as my top 2 running backs, I feel okay. If I can get one of them as my RB2 after going hero RB and then spending 4 rounds on other positions, I feel great. I love those guys. They have the touches. I agree with your, assessment that they may not be the flashiest, and most of them really are not. They don't have RB1 overall upside, but there's basically 3 guys with that upside, maybe a couple more. So realistically speaking, you're not getting those guys past the 1st round. And these guys have just as, to me, they feel just as safe for a nice RB2 floor as anybody else you're getting in several rounds, with a few rounds before them at least. All right. Well, that's running back. Any other closing thoughts from anybody on the running back position? Deep sleeper that you're targeting, or anything else strategy wise?
What do we think of Chase Brown? Just want to throw the name out there.
I'm back and forth. He's a nice 0 RB target for sure. And in fact, it's worth noting, like, the 0 RB targets, just as a note on the strategy, you really do want to go for that upside past the list of guys that John hit on and I kind of backed up. You really are going for upside, and Chase Brown is definitely one of the better picks, I think, for that strategy, because if you can get a guy who might end up being the one on his team in a good offense, that's the best you can hope for with 0 RB.
We've gotten to the point to where he's just going very shortly after Zach Moss in pretty much all of our drafts.
Yeah, very close.
And I like him better at ADP. Like I'd put Jerome Ford in that same range. I think a little bit later, both Chuba Hubbard at the beginning of the season and maybe Ty Chandler at the end of the season are good in that range. And then I like the guy that I end up drafting really late, and maybe after his week 1 performance, he won't be as late, but Jalen Wright. Just that type of speed in that offense with a couple of guys that have struggled with injuries in front of them.
Yep.
I like it.
Absolutely true. Yeah. Big one. All right. Let's hop over to wide receiver. The names are not as cute and popular. There really aren't any, I don't think. John and I were talking about the fact that we might need to come up with some names for these strategies. Realistically, it's just, are you going heavy on a wide receiver, or are you going lighter on wide receiver to focus the other positions? So let's just take an overview. Heath, when you're approaching drafts this year, what's your thought process going in on wide receivers, and how have you seen it play out for you most often?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to have one of the top 6. And I do kind of have it as a tier of 6. I'm not sure everybody includes AJ Brown in that group, but I do. He's last in the group, but I would include him. I think maybe people are a little bit more certain about the next group than I am. I'm excited for Garrett Wilson. I've got him as an end of the round 1 pick. I'm very excited for Marvin Harrison. Puka's a little bit scary, and I think we saw in a draft last night, Cooper Kupp go ahead of Puka, so that worries you a little bit. But so that's why I think it's a big difference for me between that top 6 and the next 3, and then after that it just goes completely haywire. And it's not because I'm actually worried about the guys that are at 10 or 11, 12. It's just that there are 20 wide receivers I could see finishing in those spots. So I don't end up drafting a lot of Chris Olave, Drake London, Devontae Adams, those guys that are going in round 2 that for me are in that mega tier, because I think there's guys that are going 2 or 3 rounds later that maybe aren't quite as likely to finish in the top 12, but the difference in their ADP reflects a much bigger difference than my projections or the likelihood of them being top 12. So I'd like to get a top 6 guy. I'd like to have like 4 of my top 30, but I don't feel the need to draft the guys from that group that are getting pushed into round 2.
And just to make sure we're all on the same page here, your 6 would be CeeDee Lamb, in some order: CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra, St. Brown, and A.J. Brown.
Absolutely correct.
Okay. And most likely, and you kind of hit on this earlier with the running back strategy, if you're at the very back end of the first round, you may not get one of those. But if one of them's on the board, you're looking to probably take the best one if you can.
Yeah, it's a clear top 9 for me, and I actually kind of like 7, 8, 9 in drafts this year because you get a better second round pick and you get one of those top 9. But yeah, it's those 6, and then it's McCaffrey, Hall, and Bijan, and then after that, especially with the Gibbs injury and with the Puka injury, and like it's getting a little dicey at the end of round 1.
John, you have something of a particular approach you like to take that still needs to be named. Lay it out for us.
Yeah, I haven't come up. I was joking that I might need to change my, come up with a name and change my handle to sort of, because I use it every year. It's basically looking for middle round receivers in high target situations. These are usually guys that either maybe a little bit older, maybe they have some quarterback concerns, environmental concerns. But as Heath mentioned, for me, it's like there's 8 receivers, maybe 9. The 6 that are in that first tier, and I have them all in the top 6. I have A.J. Brown at 6, Chase at 5. I'm really bullish on Garrett Wilson. I think he will have a great year, and also Marvin Harrison. I mean, they both have good quarterbacks, extremely talented. We've seen Wilson anyway thrive even with bad quarterback play. So I think could be a top 3 or 4 player this year at his position. So I feel super comfortable with them at the turn. I feel pretty good about Devontae Adams, but he's got a quarterback issue, and we don't know how good Aiden O'Connell will be, or whether it ends up being the other guy.
Minshew.
Now I'm blanking on this guy, Gardner Minshew.
Gardner Minshew, yep.
Yeah, so I mean, he's going to see a ton of targets, so that's good, and he's talented, but the quality of those targets are not as high as some of the guys going ahead of him. And then you get into this giant tier of wide receiver 2s. I feel like Drake London's being overdrafted. Puka Nacua is being overdrafted, given his splits with Cooper Kupp, who has apparently looked really good. And if he's back to Cooper Kupp, then that's going to hurt Nacua a bit. So for me, it's like you get into the 5th, 6th, 7th round, and you can start targeting guys like Calvin Ridley with the DeAndre Hopkins injury. Keenan Allen, who was like the number 2 point per game receiver last year, apparently trying to get in Caleb Williams' ear at the apartment complex that they both live in. We saw what breakfasts with Stafford did for Nacua. So I think there's that's kind of playing. There's just a lot of pretty good players, lots of targets available in that fit. Like Amari Cooper is going in the early 5th round. So I like to, if I can, get one of these guys in the top 9 and then kind of wait on the position until some of this value emerges in the 5th, 6th, 7th round. Deontay Johnson, love him in Carolina. Some of these situations that people are kind of shying away from, but I think Bryce Young will be better this year with Ken Allison as the quarterback whisperer there in Carolina. Rashee Rice looks like he's not going to get suspended, and now we have Hollywood Brown on the shelf for a while. So just a lot of cool dudes here. And then I also have some sleepers I really like. So it's not hard to sort of get your stud and then put together a 2, 3, 4 combination with these middle round guys and have a really strong receiving core.
So I wrote I mentioned I was doing tiers this week, and I wrote my wide receiver tiers this morning. I don't think it's been published yet, but just like giving a little bit away. I kind of talked about how like this huge range in ADP for the 18 wide receivers that I put in the mega tier, and like the very best value that's going to be changing shortly as people realize that he's probably not getting suspended this year is Rashee Rice, which on CBS drafts is at that, I think, the 6-7 turn, and I've got him as a round 4 pick by value. And that might be a little too low. Ridley was also on that list. And then 2 other guys that I'd put in there, I think are probably going to be higher target guys than maybe people are projecting: Christian Kirk and Chris Godwin. Both great values. So I agree completely. John and I are agreeing way too much. We're gonna have to disagree for some content here. But no, we're 100% on the same page with that type of guy in that range of the draft.
Yeah. I mean, I'm on board with those guys as well. Or at least that range. I'm looking at sometimes different guys. George Pickens has been one of my favorite targets. We'll see how the Brandon Ayuk situation plays out. We're still waiting to hear as of Wednesday in the morning.
He's either the best pick in the draft or the worst. One of the two.
Yep, pretty much. Which is, we'll see how it happens, because I've been the player I've probably hit on more than anyone. So
that brings up a good point. What do you do with Ayuk if he goes to Pittsburgh? It's got to be a downgrade.
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, I have said on this podcast and in articles this year, and I've pointed it out statistically, there has been no more efficient quarterback in terms of producing wide receiver fantasy points per target than Russell Wilson over the course of his career. He's very good at it. Now, in most of the places he's been, the targets haven't been as voluminous because they've been run-first offenses. That could be a little bit the case in Pittsburgh, but it's pretty much the case in San Francisco. And he's also dealing with Deebo Samuel and George Kittle, whereas in Pittsburgh, he's dealing with George Pickens, who I do like very much, but is not Deebo Samuel, and Pat Freiermuth, who I do like very much, but is not George Kittle. So I think that a lot of people see it as a major, major downgrade. I don't. I think he'll probably gain a little bit of targets, maybe lose a bit of touchdowns, because the offense as a whole is just not going to be quite as good, I would imagine. I would bet quite a bit on that. But I think I think that kind of balances out. I don't really know if I drop him at all if he goes to Pittsburgh.
It's really impressive, because I've been the Arthur Smith defender this offense this whole off season, because I get to compare him to Matt Canada, and you can defend anyone comparing him to Matt Canada.
True.
But I think, like, when you're talking about the difference for Brandon Ayuk, like the difference between Kyle Shanahan and Arthur Smith might be a little bit of a problem for his efficiency.
That is the biggest gap for sure.
Yeah, I think I would not have Ayuk or Pickens as a top 24 wide receiver if that trade was made, and I'd probably have Deebo as my wide receiver 10.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah.
I disagree with you, Matt. I think it's a downgrade. I have yet to call Arthur Smith a donkey on this podcast this week. I have to do it on every episode. I just don't trust him to. I mean, there will be fantasy performers in his offenses, but I don't trust him to feature the right guy or the guys that we think are the best, or do anything to cater to fantasy fans anywhere. So he's probably going to just do stuff to spite us, and start featuring the wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 there. So when this was all going on with Ayuk, I dropped him to 16, and Deebo did move up into the top 10. I totally agree with that. And if Ayuk is traded, George Kittle is going to have a terrific year.
Yep.
And I think Ricky Pearsall becomes a pretty good sleeper as well. As for Ayuk, I don't know if I'd have to actually put him on the team and rerun the projections for the Steelers, but he'll drop. He'll definitely be towards the bottom of that wide receiver 2 tier. I think he's super talented. Yep. I just don't have that. I don't have the trust in the Pittsburgh offense.
I would be very curious to see how those projections run out. So feel free to run the test and send me the numbers. I will say this. This is since apparently I've become the Arthur Smith defender. This is something I never wanted to be. If they trade for Brandon Ayuk and drop a bag on him, I feel like maybe Arthur Smith is like told in the coach's room, you have to feature this guy because we cannot invest trade capital and $28 million a year or whatever it's going to be into this guy and have you feature Roman Wilson. So that's my hope. Maybe it's a fool's hope, because Arthur Smith is destructive of all things beautiful. But
John, do you want to tell him how the Falcons used their draft capital over the last 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, let's take a look at Drake London's wide receiver 44 finish, or Kyle Pitts' numbers. Wrong. Like, I mean, I think we could bet on the tight end too having a good year, whoever that is. So yeah, he's burned me too many times, Arthur. So I'm staying away. If the only guys I trust in that offense, I think it'll be really run heavy. I think it'll be Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. And I think Russell Wilson is a pretty decent value as well.
Yeah, I do like Russell for some of the reasons I named. For me, I think I end up maybe in a similar bucket as John, which is this just not just hero wide receiver, John? Are we not just calling it hero wide receiver? Is that like stealing from hero RB? So it's lame. We want something more creative.
Well, no, that actually would work if you're gonna take a stud like this and then wait on the position for a while. Yeah, I think that would work. Hero wide receiver.
All right. Well, there you go.
Let's go.
New Twitter
will
handle
say just
at
like
hero wide receiver.
to one of your fears. Like every time I start to worry about Sam Darnold, I just go look at Justin Jefferson's game along with Nick Mullins.
Yeah.
And how,
Man.
like, whatever you think about Sam Darnold, I don't like Nick Mullins has never supported a fantasy wide receiver one.
That's very true.
And Jefferson had 476 yards in 4 games. I'm not worried about Justin Jefferson.
And to gang up on you, Matt, Darnold in 6 starts for the Panthers in 2022, he averaged 8.2 yards per attempt, 7 touchdowns against 3 picks, and then enough that Mike Shanahan's like, yeah, I want him to be the backup quarterback in San Francisco. And then he had a pretty good game when he got a start there. I think Kevin O'Connell's system will prop him up and allow him to flourish enough to give Jefferson a good shot at that wide receiver 4 spot. Totally agree with you guys that St. Brown is the clear wide receiver 3. He's got no concerns there at all there in Detroit.
If you want to go very, very light wide receiver early, you guys hit on some of the sleepers. Amari Cooper is one of my favorites. Who are some of the other names? Deontay Johnson. Anybody else stand out to you guys? Chris Godwin?
You guys actually mentioned a lot of them that I was like, oh, I should have mentioned him. Terry McLaurin as well, Kirk, Tank Dell, Amari Cooper.
What about Ladd McConkey? How are we feeling about Ladd McConkey?
Well, if you want to get into sleepers, Josh Palmer is
I like Palmer's value better.
He's being wide receiver 67 or something, like unreal. And then Curtis Samuel, I really like in Buffalo.
I think I'm getting more and more into Brian Thomas Jr. He's the cheapest of those rookie first round wide receivers. And I think especially, I mean, if you are one of those people who really values week to week consistency, then you should probably just stay away from him because you're going to hate him. But if you just want to like a spike week wide receiver 3, I think he and Worthy both could be great for that purpose. It's just Worthy's a lot more expensive.
And I think Thomas has the ability to like ascend to the wide receiver 1 spot there because Christian Kirk is sort of the wide receiver 1 by default.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely true. And Christian Kirk is like the team's wide receiver 1 as a default, but he should be a good wide receiver 2 on a team. That is what he is, and that should be his role. They think they drafted Brian Thomas to be the one. It's just a question of how quickly. I will throw one interesting note out there to Heath's early breakdown of the underdog thing or the best ball thing. Brian Thomas is going at pick 78 overall on underdog. He's going in like the 120s to 130s basically everywhere else. Yeah. It is an absurd gap. That could be the better and best ball thing that you kind of just hit on, Heath, where like the consistency may not be there. But I think a lot of it is also just like, that's just sharp drafting. I took him at the very back of the 7th round in our mock draft with Mike Wright a couple weeks ago. I really like him. He's probably one of my favorite sleepers in this range, so that's a great name. All right, let's leave wide receivers behind and move on to quarterbacks. Another one of the ones with very recognizable strategy concepts. For many, many, many years, it was late round quarterback. If you took a quarterback early, you were a noob. There are people on Twitter whose Twitter handles are literally late round QB. It was pretty much unacceptable to take one in the first couple rounds. Now it feels like that has shifted a little bit over the last maybe 2-3 years as like the Josh Allen, Jalen Hurtses have really established themselves as unbelievably top tier fantasy talents, especially with the rushing touchdowns coming in. And then this year you've got Patrick Mahomes also up in that range. The elite quarterback strategy is maybe back on the board. Heath, this feels like one where more often you have an approach or a person would have an approach. Do you have one? And if so, what would it be?
So if I'm and I think it's important to note, like in a standard CBS or ESPN or Yahoo league, there's still maybe even a 50-50 chance that somebody's going to take a quarterback in round 1. So like I'm not taking a quarterback in the first 2 rounds. I'm probably not taking a quarterback in the first 3 rounds. I'm very much on board if any of the top 4 quarterbacks, and that's in some order, Mahomes, Hurts, Allen, Jackson, any of those guys in round 4, I'm on board with it. If so, like I'm happy if that counts as early round QB, I'm good with that. If I miss one of those guys, I'm probably drafting Kyler Murray or a rookie.
Ah, beautiful, beautiful words to my ears. I think Lamar in the 4th I think should be considered the back end of early or elite QB. And then you get into the 5th and you start looking at guys like CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson, who I think a lot of us believe could be very, very good, but they're not the foolproof, locked and loaded studs that those 4 names we just mentioned are, maybe.
It does. And Chris Towers used to talk about this a lot. He does baseball only now, but when he was on the football podcast, he always used to talk about like the mystery box versus the boat. And the mystery box could be anything. It could be a boat. I don't really get why Anthony Richardson's so much more popular than Kyler Murray. Like Kyler Murray has shown us the same exact upside that we believe exists with Anthony Richardson, and the floor I think is significantly higher. And I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is a better wide receiver than Michael Pittman, or at least has more upside to be. So I have Kyler ranked ahead of Richardson. I like Richardson, and I get the theory behind it. I just can't click him in round 5 when Kyler is going to be available 2 or 3 rounds later.
Yeah. John, do you have an approach? You mentioned earlier you like to build around the quarterback tight end situation. Do you have an approach, and what would it be?
Yeah, this year I don't have like a single guy like I want to come away. Like I had the angry Tom Brady strategy a while, years ago, 2015 or something. I just knew he was going late, and I knew he was going to be all pissed off about the suspension. And I drafted Carson Palmer to go along with them, and they both finished as QB1s because Brady never got it suspended, and it just worked out really well. I don't have a guy like that this year that I have to have. I think there's a lot of talent at this position. Even getting into some QBBC options. In my draft day strategy article, I called it the Jared Goff Gambit. And that is just, a stupid name for it. But, playing Goff at home and then finding somebody else to play all the road games. You can get him QB 13 or 14, pair him with somebody like Tua or, any number of guys, Trevor Lawrence, that are even going after him. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but sometimes I'm sitting there in the 3rd or the 4th round, and I'm just looking at the board, and maybe Jalen Hurts and or Josh Allen are on the board, and just the running back, top 11 running backs are gone. The top 10 or so receivers are all gone. Laporta's gone, and you're just sitting there, and I'm like, maybe I'll just lock up one of the two best quarterbacks or best quarterbacks. For me, it's Hurts as the number 1 quarterback. I have a slight concern with Josh Allen. I think he'll be fine, but I like Hurts a little bit more. And you just are locking in one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I might also do that with somebody like Lamar Jackson in the 4th round. I think he's the last of that tier, and he's the one that's slipping to QB4 the most. And he obviously has a ton of upside. And I think there is like a 2-round drop in value to Stroud. But I love the call on Murray and Richardson, and that's sort of tier. I think Murray probably of these top 8 or 9 is the best value on the board.
Yeah, I will say I do find myself in that same exact conundrum quite often, and will pull the trigger on Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts. I do have a little bit of concern for Josh Allen's passing numbers, but the rushing numbers are just so valuable, especially like Heath mentioned in 4-point passing touchdown leagues, which is more common across the board. Jalen Hurts, I think he will almost certainly lose rushing touchdowns. I think that the tush push will not be quite as good. And besides that, he just has to score less almost for mathematical purposes. 15, both of them last year, was insane.
Right. That's the thing though. Like Hurts has been a 10 to 12 touchdown guy.
Yeah.
And went to 15 last year. Allen had been a 6 to 8 rushing touchdown guy and went to 15. I think I'm much more worried about Allen losing those than I am Hurts.
Well,
yeah.
why is the tush push not going to be effective, Matt?
I mean, they have no Hall of Fame center anymore.
Oh yeah, okay.
That matters. Maybe we'll see. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe they coach it really well. And I can't remember who the guy is. It Juergens who's in at center? I can't remember.
I forgot about the center change.
Yeah. However, I will say I don't even need to say it. Anyone who's followed me this year or can see the jersey behind me on the wall knows that my draft strategy this year is basically Kyler Murray. Because to Heath's point, he has the upside to be top 3. He has the upside to join those elite guys we just named. And the only reason he finishes as low as he even is being drafted is injury, I think. And people are basically counting on that injury to happen. I don't see why. His injuries have been kind of fluky. He's actually pretty good at getting down and avoiding contact, especially for a rushing quarterback. And I ran a bunch of numbers in a couple articles this year. When he had an elite wide receiver 1 over the course of his career, namely when DeAndre Hopkins was playing, he averaged 24.1 fantasy points per game in 4-point passing touchdown leagues, Heath. That is absurd. Yeah. And we've gotten used to either him not being on the field or him being on the field with poor wide receivers last year, coming off an ACL. And I think that people saw that and baked it into his price, and it makes no sense to me. He's going to be fully recovered from that ACL injury. Year 2 off of that, as we've talked about in this pod, is always going to be better for runners. He's got an elite wide receiver 1. He's got an elite tight end. He has some good pass catchers beyond even those 2 guys. James Conner is a good pass catcher. He's got a couple other wide receivers that are like decent wide receiver 2s for an NFL team. So he is basically my strategy. I don't like to be that like pigeonholed in my draft strategy, but I'm almost certainly able to get him in the 5th or 6th, and that's a value to me. So I'm doing it.
Yeah, and the nice thing is, like, and the thing I said if I miss Kyler was I'm going to draft a rookie, and the thing John said was the Jared Goff plan. And what you can do in a lot of drafts in the double-digit rounds is just both of those things. Like maybe round 9, 10, you get Jaden Daniels and Jared Goff. Goff's at home the first 2 weeks. You get to see what Daniels or Caleb Williams is, and hopefully you get to start your league winner after that. And if not, like Goff has to go outside like twice this year.
Yes, that's true. That is an interesting question, whether it is the indoor-outdoor or the home-away.
It's the home thing, tell. But you know,
it might be a little bit of both. But he plays a lot of dome games on the road. So if it is largely that, or at least partially that, he might even just be better for many of the road games as well. I think the Jaden Daniels highlight is great. He's going a couple rounds, 3 rounds even later than Kyler, basically into the 9th. And I think he has the upside to be pretty much the same kind of tier with his rushing upside. John?
Yeah, I was just going to add that with Goff, I would play him on the road if it's a good matchup indoors. I would probably avoid any other road games unless it's a really, really, really favorable outdoor matchup. And I'm glad you guys are mentioning Daniels, because before we moved to tight end, I wanted to talk about him. 44 expected yards per rushing yards per game, according to my rookie quarterback model, which is actually pretty accurate in predicting rushing yards. And when you have that many fantasy points just coming from, that's also going to be probably 5 to 10 touchdowns. He's also really accurate, according to Derek Klassen over at Reception Perception, the most accurate passer of this quarterback class, even though he's a little bit reluctant to throw over the middle of the field sometimes. I think they'll sort that out. I'm a little concerned about his receiving core after McLaurin. If there's like a McLaurin injury, it's not right. Great, but his rushing can probably, his rushing could probably keep him afloat. But I love the Daniels Goff combo, if you can like double tap quarterback in the 9th, 10th round.
I wanted to ask if, and I don't know if you have it available, it's just like off the cuff, but I wanted to check my number. Where are you at on Caleb Williams rushing yards as a rookie? What's your model say for that?
Well, I've got him at, I could pull up the model here as I vamp, but I've got him at, in terms of my prediction for him, I've got him at 298 rushing yards. And I'd have to pull up the model here, and I don't know if my computer will.
That's all right. That's about 120 yards less than I have, Matt. And I was wondering if I was a little bit high, so that's kind of why I asked. I had him basically at 25 yards a game. So,
okay, I'll pull that up and then bring it up here in a second.
Cool. All right, we will swing into a tight end, and there's pretty much, it feels like, 2 options here. One is you take one of the elite, call it 4, 5, it differs for some people, or you wait a little bit and end up getting someone in the 7th, 8th, 9th round, or you wait a long bit like I do and take Pat Freiermuth in the double-digit rounds, but we'll get to that. But elite tight end is both broader, deeper in terms of there's 4 of them now. It feels like there was usually just maybe 2. And also later than it used to be, it felt like you usually had to take one at the back of the first, early second when you were talking about the super elite guys. Now you're getting, Kelsey, Laporta at the 2-3 turn, and then McBride and Andrews at the back of the 4th. Heath, when it comes to approaching tight end, again, is this one where you come with an approach, and if you don't, how does it usually fall out for you?
Yeah, and I like this. Well, I've seen a lot of people really excited about tight end this year, and so this will not be popular. But I think like what you were talking about is actually that just elite tight end doesn't exist anymore. I think the reason we don't have a round 1, early round 2 tight end is because we don't have a guy that's going to score 16 or 17 fantasy points per game this year. We got 4 guys that are going to score around 14 fantasy points per game, which is really good and worthy of a round 3-4 pick. But I don't feel like we have an elite guy. And other than George Kittle, I'm not quite as confident in the next tier of guys either. I kind of have a 1 tight end strategy like you do at quarterback, and it's your quarterback's teammate. It's Trey McBride, at least in full PPR. I don't actually think that Marvin Harrison's going to be that big of a bad thing for McBride. I think it probably leads to better efficiency, and there's plenty of target volume for a true number 1 wide receiver and a tight end to be amongst the league leaders in targets at that position. So I draft McBride or Andrews at the end of round 4 quite often. Kittle's probably my 3rd most drafted tight end. And then I'm kind of like you. If I don't get one of those guys, I will wait forever and take Freiermuth or maybe pair Hawkinson up with some guy I'm going to start early in the season and just live with that. It's kind of, we always tease Adam Azer because he came up with this great or late tight end strategy a few years ago, and we never give him credit for it. But that's pretty much where I'm at.
Yep. John, did you pull up your rushing model numbers?
I did. Thanks for bringing that back up. I have 2 entries for Caleb Williams. I have his sophomore year and his last season. If you go off of his sophomore year, 19.3 rushing yards per game is the projection. If you go off his last season, 13.6.
Okay.
Certainly capable of doing a little bit more, but this is my rookie quarterback model is not very accurate in most of these. It just gives me a starting point for most of these stats.
Right.
But the thing that it's best at is projecting rushing yards per game. So I trust it pretty well.
I may pull back on that a little bit. Thanks.
As far as tight ends, John, great or late? Are you in on great or late, or do you have a different approach?
Well, I do think just a slight pushback on that we don't have an elite tight end. I think Sam Laporta could make a leap into a 16-7. If you're talking, were you talking the PPR, Heath, when you were saying, okay, so he averaged about 14 last year, Kelsey at 14.6. I think Laporta could make a leap into the 16-17 range. What he did as a rookie is nearly unprecedented. So his role in that great offense indoors with Jared Goff, the indoor cat, is really secure. So if he's available in the 3rd round, it's pretty much a no-brainer given what the other options available in that round. I've been also taking him in late 2nd round in some situations, but when I do that and Mark Andrews is available in the 4th, I get mad at myself because I think Mark Andrews in the 4th is the best value of these really good tight ends. I mean, he still has overall tight end 1 upside. I think people are just a little scared of him due to injury history or something, but he is very likely the top target in that offense, in my opinion. Certainly the top touchdown offense or option in the passing game for the Ravens. So I want to get one of the first 9, and that and a lot of these guys I'm not getting any of because of where I have them ranked, and other guys are going ahead of them. But McBride, I'm a little concerned about Marvin Harrison, but he was really solid down the stretch. Obviously, has a good quarterback situation. Kittle's going to vault up if anything happens to the Ayuk presence on the team. Evan Engram is weirdly ignored, even though that team lost quite a few targets. And then the last guy that I'm comfortable with as a tight end 1, just rolling in with 1 tight end in my roster, is Jake Ferguson. I think in the 7th round, he's a very nice value if you sort of miss out on these other guys that I've been mentioning. And you could make a case for Dallas Goedert, but his volume is kind of low for what we want at the position. And then, you're getting into guys like Brock Bowers, David Njoku, and my number 13 tight end, Taysom Hill.
Let's go.
Had to mention him.
Yeah. I'll happily add Taysom Hill at the back end of mini leagues, but I will say one name that somehow I think has gone unmentioned, unless my ears were deceiving me, is Kyle Pitts. By either of you guys, I don't know if maybe you just don't trust him, or which, fair enough. He's had 2 years of heavy disappointment. I still believe, I will believe for at least one more year. I'd like to say only one more. We'll see. But the quarterback upgrade is just so significant. And the departure of Mr. involves Jonnu Smith way more than he should. Getting back to hating on Arthur Smith, thank goodness. I believe that Kyle Pitts has the upside to join that tier because we know he can get the catches and yards. It's really just a touchdown question. And I think his offense is going to be much better, which means they're going to score more. I think Kirk Cousins is almost infinitely better. His touchdown rate over his career is like 2 points higher than the guys, at least, than the guys that have been throwing to Kyle Pitts in the last couple of years of his career. He was great with the very, 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 very back end of Matt Ryan as a rookie. Didn't get the touchdown still. I think this is probably going to be the best quarterback play and the best offense he's had. So I'm willing to take him at the back end of the 5th, early 6th. I will say Trey McBride and Mark Andrews, I'm very on board with Heath. At the back end of the 4th or so, where they're going, I think they're probably the best value because I feel much more confident in them than I do in Kyle Pitts even. And they have the same upside, which is to be the tight end 1 overall. And you're getting them at a 1 to 1.5 round discount over Kelsey and Laporta. So in terms of just both confidence, upside, and value, those 2 guys are the guys I'm hitting most often. If I miss them, I'll look for Pitts. If I miss him, as I've said before in this podcast, I'm smashing Pat Freiermuth, who I believe is a lock to be a top 10 tight end and could be better. So that's my approach.
That's a weird way to say Darnell Washington, but no. If
Arthur Smith has his way.
I like Pat Freiermuth. I didn't mean to leave Pitts out. I don't end up drafting him a lot, but I've got him in the middle of round 6. I actually think that he and Kincaid are a lot closer than everybody has them because they both have the upside to jump in that tier, but they could both be tight end 12 or 14 this year, and I wouldn't actually be that surprised by it.
Yeah, that's pretty fair.
I would disagree with Pitts. It was an oversight on my part not to mention him. He was actually one of the 4 names that I put in actually 5 when you look at Jonnu Smith down there in the 14th round. But in my draft table and strategery, the primary targets, Laporta in the 3rd, Andrews in the 4th, Pitts in the early 6th, Ferguson in the 7th, and then Jonnu in the 14th. So I would agree with that all. Like with Kincaid and Pitts, they're basically, I think the thing is with Pitts is that you're getting that guy burned me discount on him. Like people are just over it, but we have to look at the environment that he's in now, and it's significantly improved with Kirk Cousins and a different OC calling plays.
And we don't really have, nobody actually has ever made the argument that Dalton Kincaid's more talented at anything than Kyle Pitts.
I don't think so, no.
Josh Allen's better than Kirk Cousins, but in a lot of ways that don't benefit tight ends scoring fantasy points too.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. Kyle Pitts is probably, I think, the best opportunity to get the latest opportunity to get the tight end 1. So that's one of my reasons for drafting him quite a bit. All right. Well, that is positional strategies across the board. Thank you, Heath, so much for coming on. That was a ton of good stuff. We did get some disagreement in there at the end, I believe. Just before signing off, again, let us know where to find your stuff, where we should be looking for everything at CBS.
Yeah, you can go to CBS Fantasy. You can go to the fantasy football page. I didn't mention this earlier. You can look in the top right corner of the fantasy football page, and you'll see our Dynasty landing page. That's where all my Dynasty rankings, Dynasty tiers, Dynasty mailbags, all those types of things. Go check those out. That'd be great. Thanks.